The rain was coming down in sheets that night, the kind that feels like the sky is trying to wash the whole world clean. When my doorbell rang, I found my son, Kevin, and his wife Ashley, standing on my porch like two drowned rats in designer clothing. Their expensive suitcases were soaked, and their faces, which I'd only seen on glowing Instagram posts for the last 3 months, were pale with desperation. An Uber driver stood behind them, arms crossed, the meter glowing in the dark. $47.50, folks. My app's down, gotta be cash. Kevin fumbled through his pockets, pulling out nothing but lint. Ashley rummaged through her $1,000 purse and produced a crumpled $10 bill. They were broke, utterly and completely broke. After all their talk of 7-figure mindsets and entrepreneurial genius, they couldn't even pay for a ride across town. Shivering, Ashley looked past me into my warm, clean house, the very house she'd called dated and uninspired. Her voice, stripped of its usual condescending tone, was a thin whisper. "We have nowhere else to go." I looked at her, then at my son, and felt nothing but the cold, hard calm of a decision made long ago. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't have to. "That sounds like a branding issue," I said, my voice even, "not a me issue." The shock on their faces was something to behold. But that explosion on my doorstep was just the final crack in a foundation that had been crumbling for years. To understand how we got to that moment, you have to go back to the beginning. It all started, as most disasters do, with a wedding cake. That cake was supposed to be my masterpiece, the culmination of 30 years of love baked into 5 tiers of vanilla bean sponge and lemon buttercream frosting. I'd spent a month planning it, a full week executing it. My tiny home kitchen, the one I'd paid off with a decade of selling birthday cakes and holiday pies on the side, was dusted in a permanent cloud of confectioner's sugar. The air was thick with the scent of vanilla and citrus, a smell that had always felt like love to me. I had hand-piped hundreds of tiny, delicate sugar magnolias, each one a small prayer for my son's happiness. This wasn't just a cake, it was a testament. It was everything I had to give. The wedding itself was something straight out of a magazine. They'd rented a sprawling barn chick venue in the Texas Hill Country outside Austin. Twinkling fairy lights were strung between ancient oak trees, and a fiddle player was warming up on a wooden stage. The guests were a sea of expensive linen, designer sundresses, and the occasional pair of custom-made cowboy boots. It was Ashley's world, a world of curated aesthetics and carefully managed perceptions. I felt like an antique piece of furniture someone had forgotten to put in storage, wearing my best dress from a department store, my hands still raw and chapped from all the baking. As I put the finishing touches on the cake, arranging the final sugar blossoms, my mind drifted back. I saw a much smaller kitchen, and a much smaller Kevin, maybe 7 years old, standing on a stool beside me. His face was smudged with flour, his little fingers clumsily trying to pipe a frosting star onto a cupcake. I remember him looking up at me, his eyes wide with concentration, and asking, "Mom, how do you make it so perfect?" I'd smoothed his hair back and said, "It's not about being perfect, honey. It's about putting your heart into it. People can taste the love." He had beamed, that sweet, earnest smile that used to light up my whole world. Now, that little boy was a grown man, standing across the reception hall looking tense in his tailored suit. When the time came, I wheeled the cake out myself. A wave of oohs and ahs went through the crowd. It was a beautiful cake, if I do say so myself. Classic, elegant, real. For a moment, watching the soft lights glint off the pearlescent frosting, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated pride. I had done this. I had made this beautiful thing for my son. Kevin gave me a quick, tight hug. "It's amazing, Mom. Really." But his eyes kept darting toward Ashley. She was smiling, but it was a smile for her photographer, a practiced, perfect curve of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. She posed beside the cake, one delicate hand hovering near a sugar flower, but never quite touching it. Later, while I was grabbing a glass of water from a side table, I overheard them. They were standing near a floral arrangement, thinking they were out of earshot. It was one of Ashley's friends, a woman with a severe haircut and a dress that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. "Ash, the cake is a lot," the friend said, sipping her champagne. And then I heard Ashley's voice, a carefully modulated stage whisper. "I know, right? It's just a bit homespun, My followers expect aspiration, not flower. I mean, it's sweet that she tried, but it's not exactly on brand. The words hit me like a physical blow. Homespun, aspiration, on brand. To her, my life's work, my love made tangible, was just bad content. It was a prop that didn't fit her aesthetic. I saw Kevin shift his weight, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a boy. "Come on, Ash," he mumbled, his voice low. "My mom worked really hard on it." "Of course she did, baby," Ashley cooed, placing a hand on his chest. Her voice was pure condescension wrapped in silk, and it's a lovely gesture. "But we're building a brand, remember? Every detail matters. It's about a 7-figure mindset." I didn't hear his reply. I didn't need to. I saw him lean in and kiss her, a quiet act of surrender. He had chosen. He would always choose her. I turned away before they could see me, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I walked back to my table and sat down, my hands trembling slightly in my lap. I picked up my fork and stared at the slice of my own cake sitting on my plate. Each perfect layer, each swirl of frosting, now seemed to mock me. People can taste the love, I told him. But some people, I was beginning to realize, have no taste at all. And that was the day I learned that my son, the boy whose flower-dusted face was the sun in my sky, was one of them. The beautiful cake was just the first thing of mine they would try to consume. Soon after, they would come for my house. They came from my house 6 weeks after the wedding. It started with a phone call from Kevin, his voice laced with that practiced, casual tone he used when he was about to ask for something big. They were having trouble with their apartment lease, he said, and the Austin real estate market was just insane. It would only be for a few months, he promised, just a temporary stopgap so they could save up a proper down payment for a house of their own. My heart, the foolish motherly thing that it is, did a little leap. "Of course," I said. "Of course, you can stay here. This is your home." I imagined the house filled with life again, the smell of coffee in the mornings, the sound of their chatter in the evenings. I cleaned out the spare bedroom, the one that had been Kevin's growing up, and put fresh linens on the bed. I bought his favorite brand of orange juice. I was ready to be a family. What a fool I was. They arrived with what seemed like the entire contents of a department store. Suitcases, boxes, a tangle of white cords and chargers, and a professional-grade ring light that looked like a captured UFO. Ashley swept into my small living room and did a slow 360-degree turn, her lips pursed. "It's got great bones," she announced, as if she were a TV host about to renovate a condemned property. "We can definitely work with the natural light for my content." Oh. Her content turned my quiet home into a production studio. Every morning, the living room was transformed. The ring light would be set up, a tripod would block the path to the kitchen, and Ashley would be in front of her phone for hours, speaking in a breathy, intimate voice to her thousands of followers about authentic living and mindful consumption, while surrounded by a mountain of gifted products she got for free. The first casualty was the smell of my home. For 30 years, my house had smelled of yeast, sugar, and butter. It was the scent of my livelihood, of comfort, of survival. A week after they moved in, Ashley came into the kitchen while I was feeding my sourdough starter. She wrinkled her nose. "Brenda," she said, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone explaining a complex concept to a child. "I love your little hobby, I really do. But the fermenting smell is a bit much. It's affecting the air quality for my live streams. Do you think you could maybe move it to the garage?" I just stared at her. My starter wasn't a hobby. It was the heart of my business. It was a living thing, a culture I had inherited from my own mother, who got it from her mother. That starter was nearly 50 years old. It had survived 3 moves, 2 recessions, and a broken heart. It was a bubbling, breathing piece of my history, a direct line to the women who made me. And she wanted me to put it in the garage, next to the lawnmower and the old paint cans. I tried to explain its significance, but her eyes glazed over. "Okay, well, just a thought," she said, before turning her attention back to her phone. Kevin was no help. When I mentioned it to him later, he just shrugged. "You know how Ash is, Mom. She's all about aesthetics. It's her job." He said it as if that explained everything. The helpful suggestions kept coming. She thought my business name, Brenda's Bake Shop, was dated. "You need something that pops," she'd say, scrolling through her phone. "Like the Sourdough Social or Artisan Rising. Something that tells a story." She didn't seem to understand that my name was the story. The story of a single mom who built a life for her son, one cake at a time. Then came the day of the sourdough starter. I came home from a big Costco run, my arms full of 50-pound bags of flour and sugar, to find Ashley in the kitchen, humming. She'd cleaned out the refrigerator, completely. On the counter, next to a brand-new sterile-looking glass jar filled with a pale, lifeless-looking starter mix she'd been sent by a sponsor, was my old stoneware crock. It was empty. Scoured clean. I put the groceries down. My voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "Ashley, where is my starter?" She looked up, beaming. "Oh," I tossed it. It was looking so gray. And honestly, the crock was a bit unhygienic. "This new one is from a fantastic organic brand. They're a potential sponsor. Isn't that great?" I couldn't breathe. 50 years of history, of my mother's hands and my grandmother's kitchen, poured down the drain because it was unhygienic and didn't fit her brand. I walked over to the trash can and looked inside. There it was, my beautiful, faithful starter, a lifeless gray blob suffocating in a plastic bag on top of a pile of empty protein bar wrappers. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just stood there, my heart pounding in my ears, a cold, hard fury building inside me. That night, I confronted Kevin. I showed him the empty crock. I told him what she had done. He looked uncomfortable. He ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it. She was just trying to help." Help? The word came out like a shard of glass. "She threw away your grandmother's legacy, Kevin. She threw away a part of our family. And you call that helping?" "You're being dramatic," he said, his voice turning defensive. "It's just yeast. You can make more." And that's when I knew. I knew this wasn't temporary. I wasn't just sharing my house. I was losing it. I was being erased, piece by piece, from my own life, replaced by a newer, shinier, sponsored version. And my own son was holding the door open while they did it. The man holding the door was Julian Croft, Ashley's father. He arrived a month into their stay, pulling up in a black Escalade that looked absolutely ridiculous parked in front of my modest suburban home. He stepped out like he was stepping onto a red carpet, all pearly white teeth, a deep tan that didn't belong on a Texas native in October, and a cloud of expensive cologne that announced his presence before he did. He called himself a life coach and a mindset architect, which sounded to me like fancy ways of saying he was unemployed. He strode into my home, Ashley beaming at his side, and immediately began his inspection. He ran a hand over my worn, comfortable armchair. "Great texture," he said, his voice smooth and deep like a late-night radio DJ. "Very authentic." He said the word authentic like it was something quaint he'd discovered in an antique shop. He made his way to the kitchen, where I was in the middle of preparing a large dough for a catering order. My hands were dusted with flour, the familiar weight of the dough a comfort under my palms. This was my office, my sanctuary. Julian leaned against the doorframe, careful not to let his $1,000 blazer actually touch anything. "Brenda, a pleasure," he said, though he didn't offer to shake my floury hand. "Ashley tells me you have a charming little hobby here." My hands stopped kneading for just a second. A hobby. The business that had put a roof over my son's head, paid for his braces, and sent him to college was a charming little hobby. I didn't say anything. I just went back to my work, folding the dough over, pressing, turning. The rhythmic motion was a way to keep my hands from clenching into fists. That's when I saw it. As he gestured grandly, talking about the importance of scaling one's passion, the cuff of his shirt slid back. On his wrist was a massive, flashy watch, the kind I'd seen in magazines that cost more than a car, a Patek Philippe. But something was off. The light caught it wrong. The gold was a little too yellow, the sheen a little too cheap. It was a fake. A really good fake, but a fake nonetheless. It was the kind of detail a person who works with their hands, who understands the difference between veneer and solid wood, would notice. A moment later, his phone buzzed on the counter where he'd placed it. The screen lit up with a notification, and in that split second, I saw the little icon of the app it came from. It was one of those credit collection agencies, the aggressive ones that send you a dozen reminders a day. He swiped it away instantly, but he'd seen that I'd seen. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes before the smooth mask slid back into place. He ignored me then and turned his full attention to Kevin, who had followed him into the kitchen like a puppy. "Kev, my man," Julian said, slinging an arm around my son's shoulders. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, a great eye for design. But you're playing in the minor leagues, son. You're trading time for dollars. The real players, the seven-figure guys, they leverage assets." I kept kneading. Press, fold, turn. The dough was coming together, becoming smooth and elastic. "I'm launching a new platform," Julian continued, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "It's a game changer. A crypto coaching, synergy-based ecosystem for digital-first entrepreneurs. We're talking about disrupting the entire personal development space. I've got a ground floor opportunity for a partner, someone with your creative vision to head up the branding. This isn't a job, Kevin, it's a legacy. Crypto, synergy, ecosystem. It was a word salad of empty buzzwords, designed to sound impressive to someone who wanted desperately to be impressed. Kevin's eyes were shining. He was hooked. He was looking at Julian like he was a prophet. I pushed the dough into a large bowl, covered it with a damp cloth, and set it on the counter to rise. My work for the moment was done. It was real. It was tangible. In a few hours, it would be a dozen loaves of fresh, warm bread that would feed 100 people at a wedding. Julian was selling air, a fantasy of easy money and unearned status. And my son, who I had raised on the solid foundation of hard work and honest ingredients, was ready to gobble it up. I watched them walk out of my kitchen, Julian's hand still clamped on Kevin's shoulder, leading him away. The smell of his cheap cologne lingered, a bitter, artificial scent that was an insult to the honest smell of yeast and flour. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that my son was about to be devoured. The devouring happened a week later, over a pot roast I'd simmered for 8 hours. I had set the table with the good dishes, the ones I only used for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I suppose in a way it was a holiday. It was the celebration of my son's departure from a world of sense and reason. Julian sat at the head of the table, a king in my tiny dining room, holding a wine glass like it was a scepter. The air was thick with a false festivity. Ashley was filming everything for her followers, narrating our meal with hashtags, number family dinner, number making memories, number authentic connection. Kevin was practically vibrating with excitement, a giddy, nervous energy that reminded me of when he was a kid waiting for Santa Claus. I moved around them, refilling glasses and bringing out bowls of mashed potatoes, feeling like a ghost in my own home. Finally, Julian raised his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice booming, "to the future, to breaking free from the 9-to-5 hamster wheel, to legacy." Ashley and Kevin raised their glasses immediately. I slowly picked mine up. "As you know," Julian continued, looking directly at Kevin, "I've been building something revolutionary, and a revolution needs visionaries. That's why tonight I am officially extending a partnership in my new venture to my son-in-law, Kevin." Ashley let out a little squeal and aimed her phone at Kevin, whose face was glowing with pure adoration. "I'm in," Kevin said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm all in." Julian smiled, a slow, predatory curving of his lips. "All in is what it takes. This isn't a hobby, it's a total commitment, a financial and spiritual investment in your own potential." I put my fork down. The small, sharp clink was the only sound that wasn't part of their performance. "Kevin," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "what does he mean by financial investment?" Kevin wouldn't look at me. He stared at his plate. It was Ashley who answered, her tone breezy. "Oh, just the seed money for the partnership, the initial buy-in." "How much?" I pressed. Kevin finally looked up, a defensive glint in his eyes. He took a deep breath, like a man about to leap off a cliff. "I'm quitting my job at the design firm," he announced. "And I'm investing my savings, all of it, $75,000. $75,000. The number hung in the air, heavy and obscene. Every penny he had. The money he'd so carefully saved from his first job. The money I'd helped him with after college, slipping him $100 here and there from my cake earnings so he could build that nest egg. It was all for this. For a fantasy sold by a con man with a fake watch. My blood ran cold. "Kevin, that's your entire future," I whispered. "Your down payment, your security. You can't just give it away." That's when he snapped. The giddy excitement on his face curdled into a mean, resentful sneer I had never seen before. "Give it away?" He scoffed, his voice rising. Mom, I'm investing in myself. Something you wouldn't understand. What would you know about a seven-figure mindset? You've been happy playing with flour your whole life. There it was, the final, brutal dismissal. My life's work, the flour that had clung to my clothes and settled in the lines of my hands, the very substance that had built the foundation he was so eager to abandon, was now proof of my ignorance. It was a mark of my smallness. I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I simply retracted into myself. I looked down at my hands, resting on the tablecloth. They were a baker's hands, strong, capable, and dusted with a faint, permanent layer of white. He saw weakness and simplicity. I saw the house they were sitting in. I saw the diploma on his wall. I saw 30 years of tireless, tangible creation. "And we're finally moving out," Ashley chirped, breaking the tense silence, oblivious or indifferent to the chasm that had just opened between my son and me. Julian secured us the most amazing apartment in a new high-rise downtown. It has a gym, a rooftop pool. The content is going to be insane. They kept talking, their voices a meaningless buzz in my ears. They talked about their new life, their new brand, their new future, all built on a foundation of air and my son's stolen security. I just sat there, the pot roast I had cooked with such care turning to ash in my mouth. I had raised my son to understand the difference between the comforting weight of a well-made loaf of bread and the empty promise of a magic bean. But the baker's son had decided he no longer believed in bread. He wanted the magic beans, and he had just traded his entire world to get them. They were gone within the week. I helped Kevin pack the last of his boxes into his car, the same way I had when he left for college. But this time there was no excitement, no shared sense of adventure. Just a stiff, awkward silence between us. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Take care, Mom," he mumbled, before getting into the car and driving away toward his shiny new life in the sky. The silence they left behind was deafening. For the first few days, I just drifted through the empty rooms. His bedroom, stripped of his personality, was just a box with walls again. The living room, free of Ashley's tripods and ring lights, felt unnervingly vast. I kept expecting to hear her breathy voice narrating her morning smoothie, or to see Kevin's shoes by the door, but there was nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I checked my phone constantly at first, a stupid, hopeful reflex. A text, a call, anything. Nothing came. Their life, according to Instagram, was a whirlwind of rooftop pool parties, networking events with other entrepreneurs, and artfully arranged plates of expensive food. In every photo they were smiling, their teeth impossibly white, their happiness a glossy, manufactured performance. I was a ghost to them, a relic from their homespun past they had successfully shed. The turning point came about a month in. I was cleaning the kitchen, and I found the empty stoneware crock Ashley had scoured clean, tucked away in the back of a cabinet. I pulled it out. It was just an object, a piece of pottery. But looking at its empty, sterile interior, I felt that cold, hard fury from before begin to thaw into something else, something hot and sharp and useful. She hadn't just thrown out my starter. She had tried to throw me out, to erase the evidence of a life built on things she couldn't understand, like patience and history and love. She thought my work was a hobby. She thought my home was a stage. She thought my life was small. I looked around my little kitchen, the one that suddenly felt cramped and inadequate. Then I looked out the window at the garage. It was full of junk, an old lawnmower, boxes of Kevin's high school memorabilia, things I had been meaning to sort through for a decade. And in that moment, a new idea began to rise, as unstoppable as the dough I knew so well. If they thought my world was small, I would build a bigger one. The next day, I went to the bank. I had an old savings bond my mother had left me, tucked away for a real emergency. Well, this was it. It wasn't an emergency of money, but of the soul. I cashed it in. The project took over my life. I started by clearing out the garage, a brutal 2-day purge of the past. I was ruthless. Kevin's old trophies, his Letterman jacket, boxes of his childhood drawings, I didn't linger. I packed it all neatly into storage bins. This space was no longer a museum for his childhood. It was going to be the engine room for my future. Then came the contractors. The plumber who looked at my ambitious plans and whistled. The electrician who patiently explained the difference between residential and commercial wiring. I learned a new language, one of permits and zoning laws, of load-bearing walls and BTUs. I spent my days covered in drywall dust and my nights studying blueprints at the kitchen table. My trips to Home Depot became a weekly ritual. I learned how to use a power drill. I learned how to tile a backsplash, my hands steady, my focus absolute. Each tile I set, perfectly spaced and mortared, was a small act of reclamation. I was building something solid, something real, with my own two hands. While Julian was selling digital air, I was laying down concrete foundations. Then came the trip to the Costco Business Center. Pushing a huge flatbed cart through the cavernous aisles, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't just buying groceries, I was stocking a business. I bought massive industrial-sized bowls, a gleaming set of professional scales, and sheet pans by the dozen. And then I saw it. The oven. It was a magnificent stainless steel beast, a double-decker convection oven with steam injection, powerful enough to bake 20 loaves of bread at once. It was the kind of oven I had only dreamed of. It cost a fortune, more than I'd ever spent on a single object in my life. It was an extravagance. It was a necessity. I bought it. Watching it being installed in my new kitchen was a religious experience. It was the new heart of my home, a symbol of everything I was building. It wasn't quaint. It wasn't a hobby. It was a serious piece of equipment for a serious professional. 3 months had passed since Kevin had driven away. 3 months of brutal, back-breaking, soul-saving work. 3 months of absolute silence from him. But I found I didn't mind it anymore. The noise of construction, the whir of my new stand mixer, the satisfaction of my own exhaustion that was the new soundtrack of my life. I stood in the doorway of my nearly finished commercial kitchen, the scent of fresh paint and sawdust in the air, and I felt a sense of peace that was deeper than any I had ever known. I hadn't just built a new kitchen, I had built a new version of myself, one who didn't need anyone's approval to know her own worth. And so, I began. My new life started before dawn each day, in the cool, quiet hours of the morning. The new version of myself didn't need an alarm clock, she was pulled from sleep by purpose. I'd walk into my new kitchen, flip on the soft overhead lights, and the gleam of stainless steel would greet me like an old friend. The air no longer held the ghosts of their presence. It smelled of potential, of flour and yeast and the clean metallic scent of my magnificent new oven. My days were a rhythm of mixing, kneading, shaping, and baking. The work was hard, my shoulders ached, and my hands were in a perpetual state of being either caked in dry dough or scrubbed raw. I had never been happier. The call came on a Tuesday morning, right as I was pulling the first batch of sourdough of the day from the oven. The crust was a perfect, deep mahogany, and the ear on each loaf had sprung open beautifully. I was admiring my handiwork, the tangible proof of my skill, when my phone, sitting on a steel prep table, began to buzz. Kevin's name flashed on the screen. For a full 3 seconds I just stared at it. 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days of absolute silence, and now this. A part of my heart, the old foolish mother part, gave a painful lurch. Is he okay? Is something wrong? But another part, the new part I had been carefully building, stood firm. I placed the hot bread pan on a cooling rack, wiped my hands on my apron, and answered the phone, my voice perfectly even. "Hello, Kevin." "Mom, hey!" His voice was too loud, too bright. It was the voice of a salesman, not a son. "How are you? It's been a while." "I'm fine," I said. "Busy." Yeah, I bet. Listen, I know it's been a minute, but things have been absolutely insane over here. The platform it's exploding. We're on the verge of something massive." I leaned against the counter, looking at my beautiful, honest loaves of bread. "Is that so?" "Totally. Which is actually why I'm calling." The brightness in his voice dimmed, replaced by an urgent, clipped tone. "Look, we've hit a bit of a cash flow crunch. It's totally normal for a startup in its growth phase. We just need to upgrade our servers to handle the new traffic. It's a huge opportunity, but the window is closing fast." I waited, saying nothing. The silence stretched, and I could hear his breathing, shallow and quick on the other end of the line. "So," he finally stammered, "I was wondering, I need to ask you for a favor. A big one. I need a bridge loan, just $10,000. I'll pay you back with interest in 60 days, I swear. $10,000. And as he said the words, my mind flashed back with perfect clarity. I wasn't in my new, spacious kitchen anymore. I was back in my old one, watching Julian Croft lean against the doorframe. I saw the cheap glint of his fake Patek Philippe watch. I saw the notification from the credit collection app flash on his phone. I heard the empty jargon synergy, ecosystem, disrupt. And now, here was my son, using the same hollow language cash flow, growth phase, server upgrade to ask me for money. It wasn't a server upgrade, it was a shakedown. The con was failing, and they were trying to bleed the last person they could. No, I said. The word was small, but it landed in the silence between us with the force of a slammed door. What? Kevin's voice was sharp with disbelief. Mom, did you hear me? This is for the business. It's an investment. I heard you, I said, my voice still calm. And the answer is no. I can't believe this. He was starting to unravel, the slick salesman persona dissolving into the whine of a frustrated child. After everything, you won't even help me? This is my future we're talking about. You've been happy playing with flour your whole life. His words from that last dinner echoed in my ears. He had made his choice. He had chosen the fantasy. This was the price of those magic beans. Kevin, I said, and my voice was colder than I thought I was capable of. My money, the money I earned with my own two hands, will not be used to finance Julian Croft's sinking ship. I will not be the source of your bailout. There was a stunned silence, and then a choked, furious sound. Fine, he spat. I knew I shouldn't have called. I knew you wouldn't get it. He hung up. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. There was a pang in my chest, a deep, aching sadness for the boy I had raised, the one who had gotten so lost. But there was no guilt. There was no regret. I looked around at the kingdom I had built with flour and sweat and sheer force of will. My beautiful oven stood silent and powerful. My cooling racks were filled with the fruits of my labor. I had said no to him, yes, but in doing so, I had said yes to myself. I had protected my home. I had defended my work. I put the phone down, picked up my bread knife, and cut into a warm loaf. The sound of the crackling crust was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. The sound of that crackling crust was the last word in a conversation I had been having with myself for months. After I hung up on Kevin, the silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the hollow, aching silence of abandonment. It was the clean, quiet hum of a well-run machine. My machine. The weeks that followed were a blur of productive, focused work. I fulfilled orders. I tweaked my recipes. I established a small but loyal customer base who cared more about quality than hashtags. I was building, every day, brick by brick, loaf by loaf. Then, one night in late November, the rain came. It started as a drizzle and turned into a full-blown Texas deluge, drumming against the roof and streaming down the windows. I was in my living room, curled up in my old armchair with a cup of tea, feeling warm and safe and utterly content. That's when the doorbell rang, a sharp, frantic chime that cut through the sound of the storm. My heart didn't leap, it didn't pound, it just kept its steady, quiet beat. I knew who it was. I had known on some level that this day would come. I walked to the door, my slippers silent on the hardwood floor, and opened it. And there they were. Just as I saw them in that flash of a memory, standing on my porch like ghosts from a life I no longer lived, Kevin and Ashley. Their designer clothes, the ones they'd paraded in their posts about their fabulous new life, were soaked through and clinging to them. Ashley's perfectly styled hair was a mess of wet strands plastered to her face. Kevin's eyes were wide and haunted. Behind them, the headlights of an idling car cut through the rain, illuminating the scene in a harsh, unforgiving light. The Uber driver got out, a weary-looking man in a raincoat, and started pulling their expensive, battered suitcases from his trunk, dropping them onto the wet porch with a thud. $47.50, the driver said, his voice flat with exhaustion. He pointed to the glowing meter inside his car. Cash only. My app's on the fritz with this weather. The scene played out like a slow-motion car crash. I watched my son, the digital-first entrepreneur, fumble through the pockets of his wet jeans, his face a mask of dawning horror. I watched Ashley, the influencer who lived a life of aspiration, dig through a purse that cost more than my monthly grocery bill, her manicured fingers shaking as they pulled out a single, crumpled $10 bill. They looked at each other, a silent, panicked exchange. They were broke, not just cash poor, but fundamentally, existentially broke. They had traded everything real for a fantasy, and the fantasy had just evaporated in the rain. The driver sighed, a sound of pure frustration. "Look, I gotta get paid. I'm not a charity." We'll transfer it to you tomorrow," Kevin stammered, his voice cracking. "I swear we're good for it." The driver just shook his head and got back in his car, not without a final, pitying glance at them, and drove off, leaving them stranded on my porch with their monument to bad decisions. A long, heavy silence fell, broken only by the drumming of the rain. Finally, Ashley looked at me. Her face, stripped of its makeup and its usual mask of smug superiority, was just the face of a scared, defeated young woman. She gestured weakly toward my warm, bright living room. "Brenda," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "Please, we have nowhere else to go. Julian, it's all gone. Nowhere else to go." The words hung there between us. I thought of my sourdough starter suffocating in the trash. I thought of Kevin's sneer as he dismissed my life's work. I thought of the 3 months of silence, of being erased from their shiny, curated world. They hadn't wanted my home then. They had wanted a stage, a backdrop, a temporary inconvenience. Now they wanted a sanctuary. They wanted a bailout. Kevin took a step forward, his hand outstretched. "Mom, please, just let us in. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake." I looked at his hand, then at his face. I saw the little boy who loved to pipe frosting, and I saw the man who had traded his mother's love for a con man's empty promises. The two were one and the same. And I knew, with a clarity that was as pure and clean as the rain, what I had to do. I had to save myself. I had to save the world I had just so painstakingly rebuilt. I finally spoke, my voice calm and steady, carrying easily over the storm. "That sounds like a branding issue," I said. "Not a me issue." The silence that followed my words was more profound than the storm itself. They just stared at me, their faces illuminated by the single porch light, as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. The shock was so complete, it was almost comical. They had come here expecting the old Brenda, the soft place to land, the endless resource they could always tap. They had found someone else entirely. Ashley was the first to recover, her default setting of manipulative drama kicking in. Tears welled in her eyes, mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "Brenda, how can you be so cold?" she sobbed. "We're family. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. Don't you have any compassion?" Compassion? I let the word hang in the air. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My calm was its own kind of weapon. "Let's not talk about compassion. Let's talk about facts. Let's do a little audit of your terrible mistake." I leaned against my doorframe, crossing my arms. I wasn't blocking them out. I was holding my ground. "Let's start with your father's watch, Ashley. The big flashy Patek Philippe he wore in my kitchen. It was a fake. A good one, but a fake. People who can actually afford a watch like that don't buy knockoffs." Her mouth opened, then closed. "And then there was his phone," I continued, my voice methodical, like I was ticking items off a list. "That day he was selling Kevin on his disruptive ecosystem, I saw a notification pop up on his screen. It was from a credit collection agency. So, you see, I already knew your father was in trouble. He wasn't a guru. He was just a man drowning in debt." Kevin finally found his voice, a raw, defensive bark. "You don't know what you're talking about. Julian is a brilliant businessman." "Is he?" I looked my son dead in the eye. The cold rain was dripping from his hair onto his forehead, but I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest. It was the heat of absolute certainty. "Then why did you call me 2 weeks ago, panicked, asking for a $10,000 bridge loan for a server upgrade?" He flinched, as if I'd slapped him. "Let me guess," I said, my voice dropping. "The server upgrade was really to pay Julian's back rent on that luxury apartment, wasn't it? The one he secured for you? Because a brilliant businessman doesn't get eviction notices. I saw one on his Zillow app that day in my kitchen. He was looking for cheaper places to live while he was selling you on a 7-figure fantasy." The color drained from Kevin's face. He was seeing it now, the whole shabby con, laid bare under my porch light. "Your $75,000 wasn't a buy-in, Kevin," I said, and my voice was soft now, but heavy with the weight of the truth. It was a lifeline. For him. Not for you. A real partner doesn't take all the cash and leave you with all the risk. A real father-in-law doesn't fleece his daughter's husband. He took every penny you had because he had nothing of his own. I looked from my son's broken face to his wife's. They had built their entire world on a brand, on an aesthetic, on a feeling. They had mocked my world because it was built on something real, on flower and work, and the slow, steady accumulation of value. Now their world was gone, and mine was the only thing left standing. "You didn't invest in a business," I said, the finality of it settling over us. "You bought a fantasy. You paid $75,000 for a feeling. Now the fantasy is over." I stepped back from the doorway. Their faces were a ruin of shock and dawning horror. They had no arguments left, no lies, no defenses. There was only the cold, wet truth. And then I closed the door. The solid, final click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I didn't watch through the peephole. I didn't listen at the window. I just stood there in my warm, quiet hallway, my back to the storm, and I let the silence of my own home, the sanctuary I had fought for and rebuilt, wash over me. The sanctuary I had built was absolute. In the days that followed, I didn't hear a single knock, I didn't get a single call. It was as if that night on the porch had never happened, a bad dream washed away by the storm. I went back to my rhythm, to the steady, honest work that now defined my life. The scent of baking bread was my peace. The hum of my new oven was my victory song. The news of their world's collapse came to me not in a torrent, but in drips and drabs, the way news always does in a quiet neighborhood. My next-door neighbor Carol was the first to mention it, leaning over the fence while I was watering my new herb garden. "Brenda, did you see Channel 5 last night?" she asked, her voice low. "Their On Your Side segment? They did a whole expose on that fella, Ashley's father." That night, I looked it up online, and there he was. Julian Croft's smarmy, over-tanned face was frozen in a screenshot next to a headline in bold red letters, "Mindset Millionaire or Master Manipulator?" The reporter, a woman with a serious face and a no-nonsense haircut, detailed how Julian had preyed on dozens of aspiring entrepreneurs, selling them worthless crypto coaching packages and taking their life savings. They showed interviews with other victims, their faces blurred, their voices trembling with anger and shame. The luxury high-rise, the Escalade, the designer suits, it was all a rental, a stage set for his scam, paid for with other people's hopes. He hadn't just built his life on a foundation of air, he'd built it on a foundation of ruins. Curiosity, a cold and quiet thing, got the better of me a few days later. I typed Ashley's name into the Instagram search bar. Her page, once a vibrant testament to her aspirational brand, was now a digital graveyard. The comments on her last post, a ridiculously staged photo of her and Kevin laughing on the balcony of their fake luxury apartment, were brutal. Where there used to be heart emojis and fawning praise, there was now a sea of snake emojis and mocking laughter. "Number scammer-in-law," one comment read. "Did your dad's crypto coaching teach you how to live in your car?" Another one sneered. "Guess authentic living means your husband's mom has to bail you out," said a third. Her followers, the online tribe she had curated with such ferocious dedication, had turned on her with a viciousness that was almost breathtaking. Her brand, the only thing she had ever truly valued, had been publicly executed. The final nail in the coffin came from Carol again, about a month later. She'd been at the local super Target late one night to pick up some medicine for her husband. "Brenda, you're not going to believe who I saw," she said, her eyes wide. It was Ashley. She was working the overnight shift, stocking shelves in the pet food aisle. The image hit me with the force of a physical blow. Ashley. The woman who couldn't stand the fermenting smell of my history, the woman who had dismissed my life's work as a homespun hobby, now surrounded by the smell of kibble, wearing a red polyester vest and a name tag, her face pale and exhausted under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights of a big box store. The ultimate influencer, brought low by the ultimate indignity, a real unglamorous minimum wage job. As for Kevin, I heard about him from the mailman, a friendly guy named Dave who had watched my son grow up. He'd gone into the print and ship store over in the strip mall to send a package. "Saw your boy in there," Dave said, sorting through his mail pouch. "He's working behind the counter, seemed quiet. Didn't even look up when I said his name, just kept his head down and scanned my package. Looked like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders." I imagined him there, in that sterile, air-conditioned box that smelled of toner and cardboard, wearing a corporate polo shirt, his once bright eyes now focused on a tracking number. The graphic designer with the seven-figure mindset was now making copies and selling packing tape. His punishment wasn't public like his wife's, or legal like his father-in-law's. His was a quiet, internal prison of shame. I didn't feel joy hearing these things. I didn't feel a shred of satisfaction. What I felt was a profound and somber sense of order. Like watching a building, constructed poorly and on a bad foundation, finally collapse under its own weight. It wasn't a tragedy, it was just gravity. They had chased a shortcut to success and had found a dead end. I had taken the long, slow, flour-dusted path. And as I stood in my kitchen, the warm, honest smell of baking bread filling the air, I knew with absolute certainty that my foundation would hold. My foundation, I discovered, was built for more than just holding. It was built for launching. The spring that followed that long, quiet winter was a season of explosive growth, both in my garden and in my life. I had put up a simple, hand-painted sign in my front yard, Brenda's Bake Shop. Grand opening, April 1st. No fancy branding, no hashtags, just my name and a date. I spent the final weeks perfecting everything, stocking my new stainless steel shelves and filling my commercial fridges. There was no fear, no anxiety, just the quiet hum of a well-oiled machine ready to be switched on. On the morning of the opening, I was up at 3 a.m., firing up the magnificent beast of an oven. The smell of baking bread, my bread, filled the new kitchen, spilling out into the cool morning air. It was a declaration. By the time I was ready to open at 7, the cooling racks were laden with rustic sourdough boules, crusty baguettes, tender brioche, and trays of glistening cinnamon rolls, their sweet scent a siren song in the neighborhood. I flipped the sign on the door from closed to open, took a deep breath, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. First came Carol from next door, with her husband in tow. Then Mr. Henderson from across the street. Then, people I'd never seen before, drawn in by the smell or by the buzz that had quietly been building in the neighborhood. By 8 o'clock, a line had formed, snaking down my driveway and onto the sidewalk. People were chatting, pointing at the loaves in the window, their faces happy and expectant. It was a beautiful chaos. I was a whirlwind of activity, bagging loaves, making change, answering questions about fermentation times and flour types. It wasn't the sterile, silent work of the past few months. It was alive. It was a connection. These people weren't followers. They were customers. They weren't consuming a brand. They were buying bread. Real, tangible, nourishing food that I had made with my own 2 hands. A few weeks in, a young woman with a notebook and a professional-looking camera came in. She introduced herself as a writer for a popular Austin food blog. She'd heard about the lady with the magic oven in the suburbs. She spent an hour with me, taking photos of the bread, of my flour-dusted hands, of the oven itself. She asked me about my story. I didn't tell her about Kevin or Ashley or the $75,000. I told her about my mother's starter, about my love for the craft, about my decision to finally invest in myself. When the article came out a week later, with the headline "Brenda's Bake Shop, the best bread in Austin is hiding in a garage," things exploded. The line outside my door doubled. I had to hire a local teenager to help me run the counter on weekends. I started selling out by noon every day. But the success wasn't just about the money, though the healthy balance in my bank account was a quiet, constant comfort. It was about the community that sprang up around my little bake shop. It was the group of fellow small business owners I met at the farmer's market, a woman who sold artisanal cheese and a man who roasted his own coffee beans. We traded products and advice, a small ecosystem built on mutual respect and hard work. It was the young couple who came every Saturday for their weekly sourdough, telling me how my bread had become a part of their weekend ritual. It was the kids who would press their faces against the glass, their eyes wide at the sight of the golden brown loaves. One evening, after a particularly frantic Saturday, I was cleaning up my kitchen, wiping down the stainless steel counters. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow through the windows. The whole space hummed with the residual heat of the oven and the lingering scent of baked goods. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel of the oven door. I saw a woman with tired eyes, flour in her eyebrows, and a small, genuine smile on her face. This was my kingdom. Not a rented high-rise with a view, but a converted garage with a concrete floor. Not a world of influencers and followers, but a world of neighbors and customers. I was not a resource to be drained or a hobby to be tolerated. I was a sovereign, the sole proprietor of my business, the architect of my peace, the master of my own sweet, successful life. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the evidence of my own creation, I felt a wholeness that no seven-figure mindset could ever buy. That feeling of wholeness wasn't a fleeting thing, it became the new bedrock of my life. The summer months unfolded in a haze of flower dust and early mornings, each day a satisfying echo of the one before. My world was no longer small. It was focused. It was the precise weight of a ball of dough in my hands, the exact temperature of the oven, the friendly faces of my regular customers. I had stopped looking for my son's life online. I had stopped thinking about Julian's scam or Ashley's downfall. Their story was over. Mine was just getting started. The envelope appeared in my mailbox late one afternoon in August, wedged between a utility bill and a catalog for restaurant supplies. It was a plain white business envelope, the kind you buy in a box of 100 at any office supply store. My name and address were written on the front in a familiar, slightly messy scrawl that I hadn't seen in years. Kevin's handwriting. I carried it inside and placed it on the cool stainless steel prep table in my kitchen. For a long moment, I just stared at it. It felt like a relic from another era, a piece of a life that no longer belonged to me. A part of me wanted to just throw it in the trash, unopened. My piece was a fragile, new thing, and this envelope felt like a threat to it. But curiosity, or maybe some stubborn, vestigial piece of the mother I used to be, made me pick it up. My hands, steady and sure when shaping a delicate pastry, trembled slightly as I tore it open. Inside, there was no card, no fancy stationery. Just a thin stack of cash, 2 $100 bills, and a single sheet of notebook paper, torn from a spiral, folded in 3. The money felt strange in my hand. It was an insult, and an offering all at once. I set the bills aside and unfolded the letter. "Mom," it began. The letters were shaky, as if written by someone much older or much more tired. "I know you don't want to hear from me. I get it. I don't blame you. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I'm not writing to ask you to forgive me. I know I don't deserve that. A lot has happened. Ashley and I are in a small apartment now, on the other side of town. It's not much, but it's ours. She's still working nights at Target. I'm still at the print and ship, but I picked up a second job, doing freelance design work on the weekends for a small local paper. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. The reason I'm writing is to say I'm sorry, not the way I said it on the porch that night. That was just me being scared and wanting a handout. I'm sorry for real now. I've started going to therapy. The therapist asked me to think about where I went wrong, and the answer is always the same. It started a long time before Julian. It started when I began to be ashamed of where I came from. When I started to believe that your work, the very thing that gave me everything, was something small. I remember telling you that you were just happy playing with flour. I think about that every single day. That flour paid for my clothes, my food, my college degree. That flour was the most stable, honest thing in my life, and I spat on it because I wanted something shiny and fast. There is no excuse for it. I have to earn back my own self-respect before I can even think about asking for yours. I'm going to pay you back. All of it. The $75,000. I know it will take me years, maybe the rest of my life, but I'm going to do it. This $200 is the first payment. There will be more every month. It's not much, but it's a start. I just want you to know that I see it now. I see you. Kevin. I read the letter twice, then a third time. My kitchen was silent, save for the quiet hum of the refrigerators. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the fine layer of flour that dusted every surface. The very flour he had written about. I looked at the $200 on the counter. It was a pittance against the mountain of debt he owed me, both financial and emotional. But it wasn't about the amount. It was about the action. It was the first honest thing he had done in years. He was right. I didn't forgive him. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too complete. Forgiveness wasn't a switch you could just flip. But as I stood there, in the heart of the empire I had built from the very thing he had scorned, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness, it was acknowledgement. A quiet recognition of his first, painful, faltering step on a very long road. He was finally learning the lesson I had tried to teach him as a little boy in a flour-dusted kitchen. It's not about being perfect, it's about putting your heart into it. I picked up the cash and the letter. I walked into my office, a small room off the kitchen where I did my bookkeeping. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one where I kept my important papers, the deed to the house, the title to my van, the license for my business. I placed the letter and the $200 inside, right on top. I closed the drawer. I didn't need the money, but I would keep it. It was evidence. It was the first payment. And I would wait to see if he was capable of making the next one.